fucking nightmare world, and the worst thing is that it's real and we're living in it. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And I'm being controlled by something called Netflix. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film Black Mirror's Bandersnatch.
I'm going to put an asterisk on that word you just used.
Black Mirrors?
Film.
Oh, God. Are we starting this now?
Yeah, we're starting this already.
This is what... Okay,
It was
great.
prompted by our guest, whom you should introduce.
We have James and Jac from Extra Credits. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
welcome. You have returned. You've both been to this apartment before, but I don't think you've both been on the podcast, let alone at the same time.
No, but hang on. You guys
No.
also had a pod. You have your on Twitch. You have a extra film discussion, right?
Well, we did.
Oh, okay.
We have back in the day. We might bring that back at some point.
Right.
But we've been doing actually on Twitch. If we want to start promoting Extra Credit stuff so early in the episode, we've been doing a book club.
Talking about Dune.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're reading Dune.
And so you should come back in 2 years' time
Yeah.
to discuss
Oh,
the
I'm in for
Denis
that.
Villeneuve film, or we could discuss the David Lynch film.
Or it might just never come out, and it would be like
Or
some other.
You know
Dune
what would be a
films.
great thing to do is to supplement the Dune discussion with the Alejandro Jodorowsky
Yes.
book. Because it was all his work was transformed into a comic book, I think. Have you read that? So we're getting we're already diving sidetracked
Wow.
entirely.
Which is perfect,
Yeah.
right? Because this is all about a branching path discussion. so-
Exactly. And paratexts.
Yeah. Well, look. So I was super excited to talk about Bandersnatch, though. Straight up, I hate the name.
Oh, really?
I hate the name. It rolls off my tongue really weird,
Do
and
you know what it's in reference to?
I have no idea.
Really?
Yeah.
You want to explain?
So it's an Alice in Wonderland reference.
Or
but
the Jabberwocky
it
poem?
actually bothers me that it's an Alice reference because there's so much through the Looking Glass stuff in this, especially the literal crossing through the mirror.
Yeah.
That's one thing I'm going to complain about a lot on this is how on the nose it was in a lot of places. Like I actually really enjoyed it,
Sure.
to be totally honest. But yeah, so Bandersnatch is from the Hunting of the Snark.
Yeah, I've actually got I've got the poem right here, and it says, "Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch."
There's a Shutterwalk card in Hearthstone that when you play it, it goes, "My jaws that bite, my claws that catch." Yeah, but it multiplies things, so you hear that like 90 times, and you go a little insane. So this is all connecting in my oeuvre of interests.
Could we do one backtrack for people who haven't met you guys on our podcast before, and just get a little bit of backstory in terms of like the types of movies you enjoy and the types
yes.
of work that you kind of, I know you both work in games and you are, absolutely passionate about games. Everyone should check out Extra Credits. But I'm curious about your movie taste and what you're interested in.
For me, I like anything that does something I haven't seen before.
That's a pretty.
I mean, so
that's a broad category.
Good luck.
Yeah.
But I mean, as we've discussed, F for Fake
Yep.
before.
Oh yes. You guys did talk about It for Fake, right?
Oh,
Which
yeah.
is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one that I would love to. I'm sure you guys have talked about it on this thing before.
Oh,
Yes.
in detail. I
Ad
bring
nauseam.
up If for Fake unnecessarily in
And I'm sure
conversation.
it's going to come up here too.
Yeah, because it is a branching storyline.
It just did.
Right. Done.
How about you, Jack?
I like trashy sci-fi classics.
Okay.
Stargate is one of my favorite movies, and I'm not ashamed to admit
I don't think Stargate's that trashy. I think you could go really trashy if you want to go sci-fi.
Well, it depends which Stargate.
That's
If you're talking
true.
about the movie,
Yeah, I don't
we're
think
okay.
yeah.
If you're talking about some of the TV series,
I
then
like
we get into real trashy.
Yeah.
Stargate's fun. I like Stargate.
No, I like Stargate. I
Comments by
like
Matt.
Alien. I like Terminator.
Those are
I
great.
like
Those
though.
aren't yeah,
Yeah.
they don't seem trashy to me. Those are like solid choices.
I'm trying to think of the trashiest sci-fi. Well, I did.
Killer Clowns from Outer Space is where I
Yeah,
would
there's
go.
like-
Like
there's
that
like-
kind of trashy.
Yeah.
I will say,
I should say cheesy.
Okay.
What I meant to say was cheesy.
for the first time ever, I was shown the illustrious Jon Favreau film Cowboys and Aliens.
Oh.
Apparently, as a secret that I had no idea about my significant other Jamie, she loves Cowboys and Aliens.
Wow.
Like guilty pleasure loves it. And I watched it, and I had never seen it before. I like Jon Favreau as a director, and it was an enjoyable, like irreverent nonsense thing. So I don't know. That was just that was probably my cheesiest.
You're just outing Jamie on this
I am
podcast
sorry,
right now.
sorry, Jamie. But she now owns due to a Secret Santa gift swap thing, or not Secret, a White Elephant. She owns 3 copies of it on Blu-ray.
That is fortunate that the movie she loves got given
It
to her.
was
Yeah.
really strange. It was fortuitous. Anyway, Shahir, before we get into Bandersnatch, the film, I will say,
Okay.
no asterisk when I say it.
All right.
Well, you said we had an email.
Yes, we someone well, not someone, Wes from Fort Lauderdale wanted to write in, chime in and add a few counterpoints to our review of Halloween. Did either of you see Halloween, the
new
update?
one?
Yeah.
No.
Didn't see it? Are you fans of the original or have seen the original?
I enjoy the original.
Yeah. Yeah. Jack?
I've never seen it.
All right. Well, there was a remake this year, and specifically they wanted to discuss the question we raised about the morality clause, which was something we kind of talked.
Oh,
we
yes.
referred to as kind of like horror movies have some, like have a fairly flexible morality clause, but there is some sort of clause that is written into that
I
is
know the scene
created.
you're talking about.
Yeah, that is created with the audience about who can and can't be killed in horror movies, and horror
Right.
movies break these all the time. So Wes said he wanted to include. Add a counterpoint to our discussion on the morality clause that typically determines who is killed in a horror movie. And you mentioned, I guess this is a spoiler.
Yeah, so fast forward 2 minutes if you're worried about Halloween spoilers.
If you haven't seen Halloween, this might be a little bit of a spoiler, but basically someone gets killed. A young person gets killed who may not fit into what we kind of classically think about that morality clause. I believe this was done intentionally. This is the first on-screen kill for Michael in the film, and I believe it was meant to portray Michael as evil from the get-go. Michael Myers has become a pop culture icon, but it is important to state that this is not someone you should be rooting for. He is evil. You two discussed earlier in the summer that Deadpool 2 came off as being a bit tone deaf in today's violent times. I thought Halloween did a good job of not glorifying the violence, but instead showing the horrors of a deranged character.
I don't. Look, they both glorify violence in a very different way.
Oh, okay. You take umbrage with the Deadpool comparison.
Well, no. Deadpool 100% glorifies violence. There's no question. I'm saying, but Halloween and slasher films, they glorify it, but it's in a more of a like a primal catharsis sort of way, as opposed to like for humor and the lulz, if you will.
Right, and I think that's something we talked about because we mentioned how like some of these horror icons have become somewhat comedic. You know, like Freddy Krueger, for example, is more of a he in a weird way he becomes the hero of his films because he's kind of oddly likable. But Michael Myers has never had that dimension added to him. He's always been kind of a terrifying character. And I think Wes's point is true that this re-emphasized that. Even though Michael Myers films have gotten a little silly, I don't think anyone's ever tried to make him the and I'm not suggesting that like Jason Voorhees is the hero of his movies, but you're kind of in it to watch the kills. And I think what this did in that film was establish we shouldn't necessarily be in it for the kills in terms of Mike Myers.
I guess, but in no more than the other films did. Like this one didn't do it special. Like,
right. Okay.
I'm glad that the conversation about Halloween is still going on, because that is a film that I whenever there's a remake of a prominent film, and actually more so in the horror genre, I feel like there's always a little bit extra to say about it. Like it's the weird kind of what I will call the passionate cash grab, because I think horror films are things that people reinvent or reinvigorate because someone behind it truly loves it, but also the studio's like, and people know the name. So like, there's an interesting thing about that sort of conceit of knowing who to root for, who's setting up that he is in fact not the good guy. Though then again, he doesn't kill the baby.
Yeah, I think Rob Zombie's films were kind of more of an example of shifting that level of not affection, but like, you know, who we are rooting for in that character. Rob Zombie's films tried to like really identify what the issue was with Michael Myers and tell his story. Whereas I don't think this film is kind of doing that.
This film does not care about Michael Myers as a story point.
One last comment from Wes was, additionally, I wanted to disagree with Matt's argument that the 5 kills isn't even a big deal for today's standards comment. undercut the film. Now, again, I had to kind of refresh my memory on that, but I think there's a comment that's made early in the film about someone saying, oh, what Michael Myers did in the original film wasn't that bad because there's only 5 kills.
Right, we brought that up because that's a line in the movie.
And I think you said that you felt that undercut the film. Wes disagrees. The character made the statement. He was quickly admonished by other characters and basically admitted that he had said something dumb. I believe it was more of a statement on the overall desensitivity towards violence within our current society. The rest of the film shows how those 5 deaths 40 years ago has impacted 3 generations of characters.
That's a fair point. I'm trying to remember that specific exchange.
Right.
But as far as I remember, plus Wes's sort of recanting of it, the recount of it, then I will concede my point if that is the case. Good job, Wes.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Yeah. Yes. Broken us from the get-go. Thank you, Wes. Please, if you're listening in and have any comments about anything we might say or not say, email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at onlymoviepod, and also keep those iTunes reviews coming in because they're very nice and we like hearing about ourselves.
5 stars are the best, but we'll take as many as you can spare. Okay.
Moving on. We have 2 people, 3 people now. I feel like I'm the only non-game person kind of in this conversation.
Well, just to clarify,
Yeah.
I actually write mainly for extra history.
Oh, okay.
On the YouTube channel, so I'm more in your boat. I'm an enthusiast, a player of games, but I
Right.
don't have a lot of industry experience directly.
I'm sure being around these 2 guys, though, you must,
I learn a lot. It's true.
And you play, I'd say, just as much as us as well. So it's like
I play all the time.
Yeah.
But I'm not working in the industry.
Right.
Okay, and so the and this is an unusual one because while Black Mirror is an anthology series with episodes that generally run longer than up to 90 minutes in some cases, which is sort of film length, it's not something that we might necessarily classify as a exclusive film. In that in so much as it's released on Netflix, in so much as it is part of an anthology series. I'm just saying, these are some of the parameters. It's not a movie you're going to go see to the theater. And then, of course, unusually with Bandersnatch is that there is an element added to this that is fairly unique in terms of anything that we've reviewed, which is that it is an interactive element. So, Matt, do you want to explain what Bandersnatch is?
Sure. Well, if it actually kind of harkens back a little bit to the episode that James and our artist on Extra Mythology, Joseph Maslov, did on Late Shift,
Right,
which
the
is
full motion
the
video.
FMV games. And those have been around forever. Not forever, just, for a long, long time. And this is what I would consider the mainstreaming and the natural next step of that.
Okay.
In a sense where when you're watching it, you're presented with a choice, and depending on the choice, it works like a choose-your-own-adventure book from back in the day, which I loved. Those
Same.
Growing up, that was just like, that was how my parents and my teachers got me to read recreationally, and then it like tricked my brain into just being like, oh, I'll just read normal books now. So you're presented with a choice. So you can either choose one choice, the other choice, or actually, as Jack and James were mentioning before we even started this, neither choice. You can just not pick something. So those are the things. Then, depending on that, the story branches in different ways.
What is the story?
The story takes place in the 80s. It's about a budding video game developer who's trying to sort of get funding or sell his idea to a video game company to produce his game. And then it kind of spaghettis out in a sort of self-referential in both theme and platform and series way, and sort of talks about the nature of free will and if it exists. Real quick, one thing I did want to say is, since I do think this is, and I'd be interested in both of your opinions on this as well, and Shahir, you too. Whatever.
I like them.
The other guy I always talk to is, I do think this is sort of a natural progression, but I think it's because people, viewers that are able to see this, Netflix subscribers, are now inundated with how you control watching a thing on Netflix. And by that I mean you put left and right. That's correct, Zoe. I don't know if you could hear that on the background. Basically, like, you hit left or right on whatever your remote or your PlayStation controller or whatever you're doing to get to select the movie you want. You click it and then you click play. Like, it's all very even simplified controller-esque in general. So asking someone to do this while watching a film where they've already sort of been trained on whatever device that they're using to actually select buttons and make choices even like just to watch something, I feel like this is like, oh, well, they're like, we know how to do that, as opposed to if I sat my mother down to watch Late Shift, I'd be like, okay, here's the keyboard, hit the button when it says and she'd be like, So like that's what I thought. What did you sort of feel about that?
Yeah,
angle?
it's funny. That reminds me of the first extra credits episode I ever saw, which was on games literacy, and it was sort of adjacent to that same topic, that there's certain skills that people who are immersed in media can take for granted or sort of just assume that everybody knows. So I think you're correct. Yeah, that it's definitely a more accessible version.
Yeah.
So I agree there. I think that it still has some of the artifacts of a game-like experience that come from all of these things, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but especially the pacing issue where every time you make a choice, it has to pause for those 10 seconds while all the characters basically just idle, right?
Yeah.
Because we can't seamlessly cut between the two pieces, which is interestingly in some ways different than a standard video game where we can sort of interpolate between one thing and another programmatically, whereas here we just have to wait for the film to sort of catch up to the next point where we can seamlessly make that break.
Right.
I love that you just used the phrase interpolate programmatically.
Welcome to a podcast about movies.
Yeah, exactly. That seems to work. So yeah, and I think we were on a panel at PAX a few years ago talking about the distinction between video games and movies when we talked to, and I think we got into a conversation about the way in the sort of language of cinema and the way audiences are trained to kind of accept emotional changes within a film through the language of cinema, and how that is entirely different in video games. I think that topic was brought about because we were talking about video game adaptations and the inherent deficiencies that you get from adapting from one medium to the other.
Right.
Sorry. Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that that's really important because how we deliver it through games is very often through the interactivity itself.
Exactly. And I think in movies that you were mentioning the case of your mother having to sit down and program, and make choices is something that inherently in my brain is counterintuitive to the cinematic experience.
Right. Yeah.
Because the cinematic experience is, in my mind, kind of a much more internal psychological response, whereas the video game experience is a much more physical response. You actually have to physically respond, and in many cases, your reflexes are at test. So you're engaging a different way to interact with the medium itself. And I think that's a sort of unique distinction between video games and movies, for example.
Would you mind saying just a little bit more? I know it's a complicated question, but a little bit more about what you think that psychological response looks like
in games or in movies?
In movies, as opposed to the physical response.
Oh, you're going to get an answer.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe the classical example is the Kuleshov effect. So the Kuleshov effect is an experiment that was set up in the 1900s by the Soviets, and they basically determined that if you put a reaction shot of a human being with a sort of a blank expression on their face next to a shot of an action, the audience will interpret that blank expression to be a response to that action. So, for example, they took a shot of a man and they put it next to a shot of a baby, and then the audience interpreted that the man was feeling empathy or wanting to, it was feeling warm. Then they put that same shot next to a train that was that looked like it was approaching the screen, and everyone interpreted that look as being scared or something like that. As in they reinterpreted it, and I think that's part of the psychological activity that happens in movies. Now, that certainly happens in games as well, but I think games also uses a different response mechanism by, you having to physically interact with the game. And I think for me, my apprehension about full motion video games and movies and cinema in general, doing this is that the act of actually having to physically do something is somewhat counterintuitive to what we know and understand about the way cinema language works.
So that was really interesting to me in this case because in games, one of the parts of the emotive experience that we deliver is this question of what did I do, right? Which you can't exactly have in film, right? In film, you're interpreting the actions of characters on the screen, and you may be relating to your life, but you're not feeling responsible for those actions. Whereas in a game, you are, right? And that's the impact that we deliver. We can make you horrified at your own actions, or pleased at what you've done, or proud of yourself, right?
Movies can do that as well, but I think they do it in a very different way. Without and they do it obviously without the physical interactivity.
It's interesting because I don't know if I've ever walked out of a movie feeling proud of myself.
Right.
I've walked out of movies that have made commentary on the society I live in or the way that I live and feel ashamed about that way, but not about something I specifically did during the film experience.
So, and the person who was really brilliant at this was Alfred Hitchcock. And films like, I think it was Frenzy or even Psycho, where he did an unusual thing, which is that he followed the murderer trying to cover up his tracks. And what he found that did was that audiences got anxious when the murderer wasn't able to do it correctly or was about to be caught. And what was happening is there's this, again, another psychological effect in cinema is called the suture effect, where you transfer your psychological anxiety to that of a character. And what they found was that, audiences were getting anxious that this character, who's essentially the villain of the film, is, like the audience can see themselves and are concerned about their decisions. And I think it's possible, but it's a somewhat more subtle activity in cinema.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about this issue is what I feel both media have in common is that they're both trying to provide a safe space for people to explore situations that you couldn't normally. And sometimes it can be murders and, big, really scary things that you shouldn't, but it's exciting as human beings to explore realms of experience like that. Or it could be really mundane, both in games. You've got, Stardew Valley and all of that, and you've got movies about relatively mundane situations too. And I think it's interesting to think about the theater as a space where it's dark. You're sort of with other people, but they do what they can to sort of mitigate the impact of other people around you and give you that time to just sit and consider other people's actions and your reactions to them sort of in that empathic space, as opposed to games where you have to sort of be uncomfortable and you've got this sort of crisis moment in Bandersnatch where you're thinking, oh, is there a choice I should be making? Is there a sort of ethics that I should be using to be guiding my decisions right now? Is it a bad thing if I choose randomly? If I don't make a choice, what happens? And it kind of, it makes you more engaged on the one hand because ultimately your actions have a direct impact, but in a way sort of less engaged because your immersion is broken as you have this sort of crisis of how do I decide right now? How do I engage with this?
Well,
that choice is taken away from you in film.
One of the reasons that I raise this question of sort of interactivity and the choice that I make is because in games, one of the key things we have to understand to deliver an emotive impact is who the player is, right? Who you think you are. Are you the character on the screen? Are you the person sitting in front of the screen? Are you some sort of godlike narrator, right? Are you sort of that omniscient presence? What are you, right? And who do you think yourself to be? Because that'll impact how you make decisions. And it was very interesting how Bandersnatch approached that question and I think really wanted to deal with that question. And yet I still, throughout the entire experience, never felt like I had a solid grounding on who I was while I was making that choice.
I think I did, and I think that's a reason why I actually dug it as much as I did, because before we're going to slowly trickle in spoilers here. I suggest listening.
It's a spoiler.
I suggest watching Bandersnatch before listening to this episode, kind of past this point. I know we're doing it a little earlier than we normally do, but I'll try not to just say everything up front. But one of the reasons I think this worked very well, it was sort of a twofold thing. Going back to sort of a previous point that everyone was sort of making, the type of engagement and the type of emotional reaction you get from this, I think it's interesting because it's not exactly film and it's not exactly game. It's like doing a trade-off because like Jack said, it breaks your immersion when you have that moment of just sort of like waiting to see what your decision is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I had a different emotional reaction in a sort of same level of like, I'll call it like if I had emotional energy. I'm spending it just in a different way.
Right.
There were moments in Bandersnatch, the first one really was when they were on the balcony and it was like, choose who jumps.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, like I was very engaged in it in a different way than I normally would, but I would say in no more or less of an intense way, just differently. And the second part is sort of when deciding when you're playing a game, who are you? Sometimes you know for sure, like God of War, you are Kratos. Right, you are doing whatever he does. In this, the reason I think it works, and I'll get into it more, is because the centralized theme of the piece ties in with the mechanics of the piece, which also ties into the direct dialogue of the piece. And by the end of it, I actually did know exactly, or I had, my opinion anyway, I knew exactly who I was supposed to be in the game, or in the film, and that was me watching and controlling the film, and narratively that connected for me.
So it's funny because that's, I believe, what they were going for. And for me, as soon as that's where we were, it lost actually all of its emotive impact for me. Yeah, because it felt so, I don't know, almost gimmicky. That sure, right? Like, and I mean, I understand it's also commentary on our viewing habits as modern viewers and our consumption of material that is sort of exploitive or whatever, but
I thought it was so here's the thing. There's a part now I'm going to get into I think the part you're talking about that was the gimmick. Is it when it actually references Netflix?
Yes.
Okay. So when I got to that sort of I guess branch first. That was sort of my first way down the line. At first I was like, haha, that's cool. And then as I was playing that, I was like, if this is how this ends, I'm going to be pissed.
Do we want to give some context for this choice for people who haven't
Sure,
seen it
I
yet?
think we're going to be completely spoilerific.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think it's super spoilery. So basically, I think this isn't too much of a spoiler.
No.
The main character starts to undergo a crisis and sort of realize that not all is as it seems, and he asks for the first time directly, sort of, who are you? Who's out there? What's going on? I know you're listening to me. And you can say Netflix is one of your options, like the Netflix logo.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I didn't like when that happened, I was like, if this is the point, then I'm out. Like I was not about it. And then and then as sort of it went through and you backtrack and you go down different paths, etc. I was like, oh, that's not the point, but that did it kind of informed me where I was supposed to be thinking about. And then I became sort of a bit of a benevolent, I would hope, benevolent overlord. Well, actually kind of, I guess, not benevolent because I did all the bad choices before I did the good ones. So I'm just torturing people.
But I felt like Cabin in the Woods did a much better We Are the Monster.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Than...
Yeah, so I'm kind of with you on this, which is that up until choices became here's what I think. I think it's a really interesting experiment. I think it's a bold choice for Netflix to do this. I think Netflix is the perfect platform to do this thing. I think it's extraordinary. And one of the things I tend to forget about is that, we sort of think of Netflix as a content provider, but they're also a technology company. And I think this is a really good example of them, being a technology company and trying something new. And Black Mirror and Charlie Brooker are a great avenue to try this out on. I think it's a really good piece of content. They have done this before with Puss in Boots and a Minecraft story mode.
Oh, they did do Minecraft.
Yeah, which
Netflix.
you can play on your whatever device you have. But I think just from a technological point of view, the fact that they're feeding to many different types of devices and trying to create a consistent experience is really extraordinary. And so for all those reasons, I actually did really appreciate this. But I'm with you in that I think fundamentally, I was not. There's two problems. For me, I was not emotionally invested in Stefan's journey or the choice. Like the story of this particular episode, and there was an interesting thing for me was that when I started making choices that when I play games, I tend to like put myself in the mode of trying to protect the character or trying to do what I perceive to be the right thing. I bring my morality into the game. And what I found with this was that the more it happened right at the beginning as well, which is when a choice I made, which I felt was consistent with what the character wanted, turned out to be the wrong choice.
You chose the wrong cereal?
No. I wanted him to work for the company, and then when basically the game or movie or whatever you want to call it started rejecting that choice and making me do it over and over again, I found myself becoming a cruel overlord, and I was just like going, okay, I don't care about protecting this character anymore. What I want to do is see how messed up I can get. And so I found myself getting very cruel and not invested emotionally. Now, I think there's an opportunity in this story for there to be like a broader commentary about that in relation to Bandersnatch and the story that they're trying to tell. And for me, what happened is by the time they started branching out into multiple different, narrative conclusions that were all really varied and wide, none of them really satisfied me. They were interesting, and I think, this is sort of that Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message kind of thing, but I wasn't actually invested in what was happening. And I think for that, it's an interesting experiment, but not necessarily the most successful one.
So again, that moment with the game company, that's the first one that actually can actually end the film for you.
I think we made the right choice.
It's a false ending though, because it's also a teaching moment, right? It's meant to teach you how to play the game.
Exactly, but it's a teaching moment in two ways. It's a teaching moment to show you, if you make a mistake, you can go back and basically see a brand new cut down previously on mini cut of what you did to that point, which they're different every time, and by the end they change in just different, not even just based on choices, just certain characters like, it's you again, because they can sort of see through the facade. But two, your choices up until that point are super benign, just sort of getting you in the groove of making choices. It's cereal, it's what music you listen to on the bus, that sort of thing. And I actually was like, all right, kudos to that, because that's like such an easy choice, even from a tech perspective, like just play a different song in the headphones.
But that one was really effective. I actually feel like the music choice in the beginning was the first one that sort of brought me in, because that not only allowed me to contextualize my own experience through the emotive effect of the music, but that's a very human choice, right?
Yeah.
And that allowed me to define the character.
So in the game, when he goes to the game development company and they offer him the choice of doing the gig, at first when I chose, of course, because that's the path the character was going, just like you said, Shahir, that would be what I would think he would pick, and that's where I thought the story would go. And then it came to a bad ending and you had to go back. At first I was like, well, that's kind of bullshit, because I was like, the whole movie sort of trained me to get to that point and because that's what the kid wanted. He went in for the meeting, and the way the dialogue was, I'm like, the dialogue's sloppy, because it felt very like Fallout 4, where you have 4 different choices and 3 of them get you the exact same thing no matter what you say. And I was like, okay, is this what this movie's gonna be? But then kind of what you said, how it knocked you, where you're like, oh well, I guess now it made you, Shahir, think in a different way and not just try to make the best choice, because now the game is sort of the game/film has trained you to think, oh well, my normal moral choice won't always get me the thing I think it will, and now I'm going to be more free flowy with where I go. Because if it was just sort of like you make all the good moral choices and you win, that would be kind of a I liked I'm stumbling. In the moment, I didn't like that, because I felt like it was sloppy and forced. By the end of it, I was like, I'm glad that happened, because it made me, and it sounds like it made you, make different choices than you would otherwise.
But this is my problem, because that's what I expected the message to be.
Yeah, the commentary of the film to be about that.
Right, and the fact that we as viewers, right, you think it's about free will, right? You think you have free will, but in fact, the game is constraining you by its very nature throughout the entire thing. So while you think you're the operator, while you think you're the person from Netflix controlling this person, it's actually Charlie Brooker and Netflix controlling you.
Yeah.
And you're just part of that experience. But that commentary didn't really get made. It was much more, you are the monster from Netflix, right?
I have a theory as to why this happened. And I think it's one of my criticisms of Stefan as a character. I think that they did their best to establish him as being a fundamentally flawed, broken person who, at 25 or however old he's supposed to be, needs his dad to pick which cereal he eats in the morning. Right? He's on medications. Like, they're trying to show us this person cannot function. without assistance. And I think they maybe stigmatized some of his sort of mental illness and his need for therapy and medications too, which is a different point, but one that I feel like I have to bring up. But I think that in order to make us feel okay with making choices for him, they didn't make him very keen on making any choices for himself, such that we felt bad when we felt like we did the wrong thing.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and I think to me I actually think the potential for this was, to me, the most exciting potential was when you did start having, as a viewer, a dialogue with Stefan. When he's asking for a response and you kind of give him one, and there's sort of, I think there are sort of interesting potentials that this film, or this episode, leads into, where, for example, we peel back the curtain and we realize that we're watching a movie being made, or we peel back the curtain and we realize that there's a government conspiracy that has been watching him his entire life. Those are all really interesting ideas and meta commentaries that I think actually do tie into what this is about. But none of them. But I think the issue here is that the film is so intent on showing us the multitudes of possibilities that we don't ever key into one that is actually clear and cohesive. So, there's all these different possibilities of what is actually going on.
I keyed into the one ending, though. I mean, I keyed into what I'll call the good ending, even though it's the ending I'm thinking of, which we'll get to later, is sort of like, it's also a sad thing in its own right. But it was the most sort of like cyclical, complete. Felt like I had completed the story / game / film / whatever we want to call this interactive experience.
Right.
A lot of the other ones felt like almost like sugar or interesting thing. Like now let's get into some of the endings, I guess, because we're going to start talking about them. One of my favorite ones was actually, let me rewind. Does everyone think they saw everything?
No,
I don't think I saw everything.
I'm sure I didn't see everything.
I think I saw everything, and based on my research that I did on this afterward, I have yet to see a branch that I did, a main thing anyway, that I did not see. Sometimes in the rewinds and the recaps, I think there's different things that I might have missed based on order.
Here's what I would say, but in terms of that question, is that I think I saw a lot. If I did miss something, I'm not necessarily interested in going back to revisit.
Yeah, which is fine.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree. In fact, I was very almost relieved when I read that I was looking for there might be one or two things that I didn't hit, but it seemed like the main points that they were trying to do I had seen. And the way that I got there was sort of like, going forward, back, forward, back, forward. Like it all felt very, even though it was a lot of branching paths, I felt like I was navigating the maze correctly in the moment.
Well, what's interesting is they also assist you with that by the way they do the rewinds, right?
Yeah.
Rather than the old books, you have to figure out where to flip back to. They flip you back to whatever the key inflection point is.
Yeah.
And I thought there was another interesting opportunity there was when the characters recognize that you've come back.
Yep. Only one of them does.
When Will Poulter kind of says to you, hey, how did you know that? And you know information about scenarios that have happened before. And I was like, oh, if the actual, the process of playing the game is revealing what the narrative is, then I think that would have been interesting. But I think those things didn't quite line up into a singular experience.
Side note, this is a tangent, but poor Will Poulter, man. You hear about this whole Twitter garbage?
No, what happened?
Yeah.
So he's basically, and the articles themselves are a little bit like, but I don't think it's as big as they're sort of making it out to be. But like the clickbait was like, Will Poulter quits Twitter over bullying and da-da-da-da. Basically, because of this movie, people were like really insulting just the way he looks.
What's really strange is that this didn't happen around his performance in Detroit.
That was my point, because he plays one of the most disgusting, horrible people in Detroit. Like he's a racist.
I'm guessing the community that does the online trolling.
This is where I'm going.
Watch films like Detroit.
That's the thing. Basically, and he wrote on Twitter. He's like, I'm just for my own mental health. He's like, I love hearing from everybody, but it's just getting weird and toxic. And he was like super like his response is chill, and it was just sort of like, I 100% get it. It just sucks that it exists. And I was like, why? I was thinking that I'm like, why was this character who seemed pretty cool and like he had definite flaws, but he was like, I don't know, an interesting character.
Is this Colin? I don't know the.
Yes, Colin. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, Colin. He played a brutal racist cop in Detroit, in the film
Brilliantly,
Detroit.
might add. I think we talked about it. He was very good.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
But like a terrible he played a terrible character beautifully. And when I see backlash about his look in this thing, I'm like, oh, this is kind of the like what you said, Shahir. It's like that sort of like the toxicity sometimes we experience in games has now bled over into this mix of game and film. And I was like, like it was weird. Mm-hmm. It was weird. Anyway, sorry. I read about that earlier today, and I was like, that sucks.
Yeah, I think that leads into kind of an interesting point to me, though, which is I think the film looked really good.
Yeah.
I think that Netflix is exceptionally good at doing sort of historical period pieces for recent decades.
Yeah.
Like, they do the right amount of nostalgia without making it feel pandering, and there's all these little details about the way people look and what's going on in the background. I think they... Yeah. I mean,
the list of music he tells them to pick up.
Yeah, that
very
was super
specific.
fun.
Just like the makeup that people are wearing, random people in the background. Nobody feels like an extra who they threw a mohawk on because it's the 80s. Like, it feels very curated, and I think they did a beautiful job of giving us the feel of this sort of game design world in the 80s.
And I loved just to that point. It's almost like this film / game has its own scoring system kind of at the end of it, which is you're watching this 80s television review show of video games, which felt so... I to be honest, I don't think I've ever watched a show like that, but it felt real to me because they did the work. And so you get like, oh, the guy reviews is like, oh, well, Bandersnatch gets a 2 out of 5. It felt like something was there, but you da. And so like when it first happened a couple times, I'm like, I'm getting 5 stars. I'm getting 5 stars. And of course, that's not the ending I would consider the best ending.
I think that actually leads to an interesting question. So to your point, which I think is correct, is that like it is a beautiful looking piece. It is constructed well. It's written well. It's acted well. It has all the tenets of high cinema in some respect. But on the other hand of it, it is kind of partially a game. And I'm curious from all of your points of view as well. Is like, what do you think its failings are, as if you were just looking at it as a game, not as a film? Like, what are the issues that it has as a game, and where do you think this has been done better, or there are better examples of this, or something so that people like me who are on the film side of it can consider what the other side of this equation is?
So for me, I would say that the limited nature of the interactivity, not understanding who I am as a character, and therefore not understanding sort of where the empathetic core of it is, was the problem for me.
Right.
If you look back to some of the Telltale games, like the original Walking Dead, right? That had a surprisingly relevant and impactful story where, even though they didn't actually give you any more branching than this did, because all these games by their very nature, because you can't create 1,000 hours of content, the branches are limited, your choices felt much more impactful, and they were the sort of thing that you anguished over a lot more. There's a moment in this where things like kill your dad should be a big emotionally impactful moment, and it wasn't for me, right? And so there's just a lot of that setup sort of lacking. So that I think would be the problem for me.
Right, and of course this is hindered by the fact that we already mentioned as well that this is a film and television company trying to deliver some hybrid experience that brings that in, and obviously there are technological limitations to the way you can do that on the mediums that are described. Not least of which is the fact that you need time to make decisions, and you can't interpolate graphics in that way as much as you can just like play a shot out for 10 seconds. Yep. So that it is just a different medium. But I'm just curious from your point of view, as a game, does it work?
Yeah, I think for me, and this is tricky because I don't know if this is me saying that it's not a good game, or if this is me saying that it's just a game film hybrid and it's going to be different. But I think I would have liked more flexibility. So the inflection point that it turned us back to was very late.
Right.
It was probably more than halfway through, and there were a lot of other choices that it seems like James and I, when we were watching it together, we happened to choose the right choice, and it seems like you had Matt had the frustrating experience of kind of just being told, well, no, you didn't make the right choice. And make this other choice instead. But but I think for me, I think about a video game like the other Detroit Become Human, which is all about a similar thing of you have a limited amount of time to make very important choices. And at the end of each chapter of that game, you see a tree that shows you all of the possibilities and shows you the path that you took and shows you all of the other paths that you could have taken. And for me, I felt a little frustrated sometimes not knowing if it would be worth it to go back, if there was anything there, or if I was just being steered in a certain direction.
And it's interesting as well, I think, in a way, because this is sort of a hybrid, it exposes the unique differences between the two mediums in a really sort of profound way, which is that, for example, when I sit down to play a game, I know I'm in, I can play for hours and hours at a time. About 30 minutes into this, I did find this tiresome from this, and I was kind of going, when is this going to be over and when can I be done with this? And it sort of sparked kind of the profound differences of expectations that we can have when we're playing, when we expect interactivity to be unique and profound and to have to actually affect our experience versus when we are sitting down to watch a movie where we don't sit down to watch a movie for 7 hours unless you're watching like a Bella Tarr film or something like that.
Unless you're watching your favorite documentary of all time.
Oh yes, the O.J. Simpson bit, which I did. I have watched twice through in single sittings.
Wow. I was gonna say,
but that's because I'm weird.
Yeah. I had a lot of moments where I was. This is why I actually the exact reason why you didn't like it was the reason it kept pulling me back in. Was that
to clarify? I did like it.
I'm sorry. That made you want to quote put it down or stop it, because I got to those points and then it seemed like at the right moment, maybe just for the pacing that I was preparing myself for, it did something where I was like, what? No. Oh, all right, I'm back. Like it kept. I find games, movies, books, anything that has me on a scale of like, I love it, I hate it, or I'm not sure, but I love it again, and anything that can keep bringing me back and forth, I will always be more passionate towards, because I think that exercise, at least in my experience of experiencing things, is a more difficult thing to pull off. Mm-hmm. As far as gameplay, how could it be a better game? It could be Enter the Gungeon, but it's not. No. I was thinking the entire time. I was thinking of how I need to go back and play and finish Life is Strange.
That's the other one I was going to mention.
And Life is Strange is such. It's this as far as like there's big life events, but it's sort of like it's much less psychological horror-ish, and it's just sort of like a girl going to an art school. And her life sort of going around it, and I felt far more connected to my not only the characters in that and being the character, but also I felt like the choices were far more impactful in that, and I was like, well, this, other than certain QuickTime events and sort of I'm trying to think of other mechanics in Life is Strange that could not be done on Netflix.
So the mechanical conceit in Life is Strange, which was interesting, is the ability to reverse time. So within every choice you make, you sort of get that choice to see a little bit up that branch and then go back,
right? Which
I think did a lot for letting you understand and feel out what those choices might mean.
Yeah, which I guess I'm making a big stretch here, and I don't think this is real.
Could be done, yeah.
You could do that in this.
Oh, yeah.
You could watch to a point and then hit rewind on your thing and go back.
But because they put it within the narrative, it didn't feel
like
And I think again there is this sort of this is something unusual for film viewers or or Netflix viewers. So to kind of there's a bit of a learning curve that's involved for film viewers to get into this mode of watching. And I think like in that respect, I still enjoyed what this was, and I enjoyed that this exists, and I just like. I don't think it was necessarily a profound or particularly a fully functioning experience that the opportunity for this medium has, or this hybridization has. But I think it's a really interesting it's not the first step, but it's an interesting step on a large scale.
Yeah, I just really think it hamstrung itself by trying to focus on psychological horror instead of metaphysical horror.
Right.
That they had an answer for the question, who are you? What are you doing here? and what is your role in this character's life, instead of having us question, are we the delusion? Are we the voice in this person's head? Are we gods? Are we people on Netflix just toying with these lives for our own amusement? And is there this sort of magical book or game with a Bandersnatch in it that's seizing people and taking control over their lives and controlling their minds? Are we the Bandersnatch? Like, it didn't give us that question.
Yes.
It answered it. And I think that it hamstrung itself by trying to free us from our sort of guilt for controlling this person.
So it's funny, though. I actually completely agree with you there. When it picked up for me, because I sort of had the same experience during the first half hour, I was like, this is neat. I'm enjoying this academically, but I'm not necessarily enjoying it sort of in the way that I would going to a film or whatever.
Yeah.
The moment where I actually got to the first ending, and maybe it was just the ending we got to, we started having this rapid fire reverse time, go back, experience something radically different, right? And one of the things that's interesting about doing it in a film rather than a game, in a game format, especially if you're doing a traditionally animated game, you have to build a lot of different assets to do a totally different, whereas here, we can just put you in a different room, right? And all of a sudden, you could go down these radically branching paths. And this moment where it showed what's actually inherently interesting about your choose your own adventure, the possibility of radically different experiences. And it just did that rapid fire for me where, okay, now we're in the future with this woman programming this thing. Oh, now we're dealing with programming control and this like experiment. Okay, now we've chopped up a body and have built the perfect game, right? And we kept going back and forth. That moment was the most interesting thing to me. And to me, I almost want to experience one of these as a group of related microfilms.
Right.
This is perfect. Like 6 minutes, and then a choice which impacts or seeing a radically different possibility for those same 6 minutes. Was more interesting to me than watching an hour of film with this.
Right. Yeah. And I think for me I think all the multiple endings are really interesting, but the issue that happens here is that the medium is so profoundly different that essentially the medium is what we're interested in, and the way in which we get multiple endings are interesting. But the endings themselves lose their impact because we're seeing multitudes as opposed to a singular, identifying question about like, what is control, what is consequentialism, or how does free will work in this world, and what does Bandersnatch mean, metaphysically, I think, to this character. Like, what is the overall arc of Bandersnatch?
Or even, who is this person? Who is this character? Right?
Well, but I would say that what was interesting to me is where in a film or whatever you may be used to being curious about the ending, what those micro changes did to me was it recontextualizes it. Now, rather than the ending, I'm interested in the inciting incident or the question. What if this inciting incident had happened slightly differently, right? What if I conceptualize or think about this moment slightly differently? Where does that lead, right? And so the question of where do we lead rather than where we end up becomes primary. And that to me was an interesting thing, but it didn't occur until sort of the end of the film for me.
Yeah, and I think if there was some way to kind of wrap that question into sort of if we was to basically take all those multitudes of endings and then wrap it in some sort of some sort of sense, I guess, of an ending, or some sort of sense that brought the experience together, I think that would work. Now again, I still liked it.
I think the thing that brings it together is kind of twofold. One, Colin as a character, because he can sort of see through everything that's going on throughout the entire thing. As it progresses, he gets more and more like sort of in the know. And then two, the reason why I think this is probably my favorite, I'll call it a FMV game because it's basically what it is, my favorite one, because and it's almost like it's my favorite because it's a one trick pony in a certain way. It works, like I said in the beginning of this podcast, because the theme of it it perfectly meshes with the plot, which perfectly meshes with the mechanic, which meshes with your experience. I don't think that like this would work. I mean, I played a bunch of full motion video games and they're fun. And when we even did Late Shift, James, the reason why Late Shift was enjoyable was because the three of us were sitting there and we were making choices together, and like it was just sort of it was like it was really fun. It was fun because we could talk about it like da-da-da. I don't think I'd want to do that with Bandersnatch because in Late Shift, the control mechanic was never tied to the plot or the theme of the piece. It was just like, this is what you're doing. Right. Where this, it was like, it felt weirdly personal, exploratory, and just sort of all tied. All of the things it was trying to do, I felt like tied together very well. Did it then answer what it thought the question of, like, does free will exist, or was there something that ever sort of did that? I don't think narratively there is. I kind of think, based on mechanic, it did, because it's basically saying there's a ton of different branching paths in the universe that every choice you make can sort of go down, and it lets you take as many as budget would allow. Like it takes a little bit of disbelief from both a narrative perspective and a little bit of belief in like how a thing is made. Yeah. Like, because you can't ever get that truly like infinite possibilities if you're saying like, oh, infinite universes exist based on Microsoft. I just think if this film had any other plot with this mechanic, I wouldn't have given a shit, if that makes sense. And again, I feel like I'm singing a lot of praises on this thing. I have issues with the acting was like 75% there, depending on what character was doing what. I hated the game developer guy. He just felt so cartoony in a world that did
boss?
not.
Yeah.
He was terrible. And I get the thing he was going for.
I think I just enjoyed that he was so big in a sort of weird world. You know, I don't think he was a bad actor. I just think
it was a choice that derailed me.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't call I don't want to call the acting bad. It felt out of place, and I was like, is there a point to this? It was like, no, he's just made a choice. And I think that I actually liked all of the endings that weren't, quote, the true ending, because they were just like an irreverent kind of, oh, this is what could have been.
Like, for example, to me, the one that really didn't work, was when they were like, oh, well, shouldn't there be more action in here? Do you want to see more action? Yes or fuck yeah. And I was like, okay,
that was the worst. That was the worst ending era.
That was just the worst part of the experience.
Yeah, I think it kind of it was drawing attention to the possibilities so much so that it was drawing you out of the world of this, the questions that this world was kind of posing, which I think that's when I kind of dipped out of it. But the oddly, like the one that I think, because I think you mentioned the true ending, what you think might be the true ending, and I think I know the one, which is where you choose to die with your mother.
Yes.
And I think that is a really interesting story. That kind of gets told throughout this episode, which is that he had this mother who passed away, and he has the opportunity through this multi-branching narrative to kind of like go back and revisit that moment. Not unlike a film like Source Code or Groundhog Day or something like that.
Yeah.
And then we should be sort of profoundly affected by the choice he makes at the end of that film. The other one, the other film I kind of thought about was The Butterfly Effect.
Right.
But I think by the time I got to that point, I wasn't invested in the emotional catharsis of him making that choice, or even me making that choice for him.
I was invested. Sorry, real quick. The only thing I'll say is I was not invested in either of those things. I was invested in the moment where it clicked over that that's what I would have to do.
Right.
And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, it was just a moment of
Die
like
with mom.
But like
cool.
it made it kind of
or
like,
kill dad. One of the other.
I didn't want to kill dad. Dad was like that pseudo like kind of like movie dick, not a dick sort of character. And then I was just like, when I realized the reason it worked was I realized maybe 2 steps ahead of when it actually went there, and then it made me feel clever in my little animal brain for realizing that.
So I was just curious, because I've heard a lot of people refer to that as like the secret ending, or the true ending. But I think, aren't you like everyone I know has gotten there? I think you're forced to get to that ending.
Well, that's where the credits roll.
Yeah,
unless you stop.
Right. Yeah, because that it was right after. Maybe it was after that, or I'm not sure where I had, but there was a point at which I couldn't play anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I
think that's it.
Yeah, and then once and that may have been like the algorithm basically saying you've explored all the options at this point.
I think there's something to that because a lot of articles were saying like, well, no, that's not exactly true, because some people didn't get. I think that branch is when you find the secret cabinet and there's the different things you can punch into the thing. And the 3 that I did, I think, were Pac for Pac-Man.
We did that too. Yeah.
And then PAX, and then
Toy.
There might have been a fourth, but I don't remember.
There is a fourth, but I didn't see that option pop up.
So
we didn't get that option.
So, but the toy is the one that gives you sort of, and I waited the longest to do toy. I did every other option before that time. It seems like people are calling it the true ending because the credits roll. I think after it, then you get the
actual credits.
Yeah. It might have to do with how many things you've seen. It might have to do with. I guess. Oh, actually, I wonder if toy doesn't unlock until a certain point.
You can definitely do toy before you do pack.
Packs. No, I got pack and toy first, and then I got
Us too.
Yeah, and
really?
then packs and toy second.
Yeah. I was the opposite, which is I got pack and packs first,
Interesting.
and I chose pack, PAC, and then it was the second time around I got toy as an option, and I think it was toy and packs, and I picked toy.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's no rhyme or necessarily any. I didn't feel like I was making conscious decisions to get to a point. I felt I was just making decisions at that point.
Right.
Like one
You're
way or
going
the
down
other.
you're choosing left or right, and you're going down the slide.
The rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Where
Alice.
the white rabbit is.
Well, you could take the red or the blue pill.
I will say, from your earlier commentary, one of the things I was a little bit disappointed with, which I don't know if they can mechanically do with this format, is there were a lot of places in this where I felt like the correct choice was to stop playing, and I wanted them to, in some way, incentivize that. I wanted them to give me an ending for pressing stop, right? Or pressing go back.
Yeah.
Well, you also mentioned something earlier, which I didn't experiment with, was making no choices.
Oh, yeah. What happens if you don't pick something?
So we at least found one instance in which not picking something did something different.
So it was when he's in his therapist's office, and the choice, and when he goes to her in our run through, it was the first time saying, so stuff's going on here, and it's really happening, and the choice is to tug your ear,
Right.
or
Yeah.
bite your nails, and we didn't choose anyone, and it auto chooses bite your nails, which it does. At other points, it'll sort of auto-choose an option for you. But he goes to bite his nails and, like, physically can't. Like, he's trying, and then his other hand stops him.
Did it stop that for you, too?
Well, actually, the odd thing is I chose to bite my nails, and the same thing happened.
Oh,
So,
see, we
that's
were
too
so
bad.
impressed because we were like, like, he's trying to make choices for himself, and he literally can't without us. How cool is that?
Yeah, because I remember that one because I bite my nails, and I was like, okay, I'll pick something that I know.
I bite my nails, and I chose the ear one. And it's a similar thing. He goes to reach for his ear, and he kind of stops himself.
See, I'm disappointed in that. I'm glad that they gave us the illusion of that experience, but I'm upset that it was an illusion.
Yeah.
Because they had to know that people were going to go and talk about the choices that they made and find out that that wasn't real. It would have been much cooler if there was a point at which he could no longer make choices for himself without you.
Yeah.
Well, one of the experiments I want to do is go through and just make no choices.
And see where it goes.
Right, because that, like, since the whole thing is based on him feeling like he's being manipulated, if you never do it, does it have the same storyline? Like,
or I wonder if it takes you to whatever, and I can't remember because there's so many different options. I wonder if it takes you to sort of like the most indifferent path. Like there must be a certain ending that gets you. Like it's definitely not like chop up dad.
It's depressed at home watching playing video games probably or something like that.
I have no idea.
Maybe, although if I had to guess, and maybe we'll do this experiment and report back, but if I had to guess, I think it would be the ending where he just gets off his meds and says, you know what? I think I can't control myself and I don't make any choices, so I guess I'll just murder someone. And
maybe
in a way, what the thing that I do like about this is that there is the illusion of choice here, and the medium kind of ostensibly prevents you from having profound choices like you would have in a video game. So there's this conversation about choice and consequentialism and free will versus determinism, but none of it really matters because the choices aren't able to be changed by you that much. Like you will just kind of go through the experience and live it. And I think sort of again, that medium is the message kind of idea. I think that is sort of an interesting way to watch this thing.
Well, the plot even goes. I mean, it's just about that too, and not to like even some of the Easter eggs. And obviously, it references other. Is this a shared universe thing with the rest of Black Mirror with all the different references? But also, like, there's a Ubik poster in Colin's.
I enjoyed that.
In his room, and like. Just like stuff like that kind of, you know what I found a little bit interesting, and I don't want to. I go back and forth on if I think it was. I want to know why they did it, but the symbol, the branching path symbol, is known as the white bear because in the other episode, that's what comes up on the screen.
I haven't seen the white bear.
So that's like a thing that they do. Also, some of the other games in the company are references to other
Metalhead,
Metal Dog, or Metalhead, and Nosedive is another name of a Black Mirror episode with Bryce Dallas Howard,
and also foreshadowing your later choice.
Yeah, and also foreshadowing. If you listen to the tone at the end of the true credits, when you put in the Bandersnatch tape, you run it through an audio decryptor, and then it brings you to a QR code with the white bear symbol, which then gets you to a secret page of the TrevorSoft websites, and then that gets you like access to playing the game Nosedive, which we were talking about before, James. It has like a light ARG sort of element to it, which I appreciated, and I liked how not deep it was, because I think that is and only because that is, again, Netflix knowing its main audience. People that find this are or people that when this is someone's first experience with something like this, chances are they haven't played many ARGs in the past. So this is like a cool gateway of like, oh my God, this is crazy.
Yeah, there's secrets. How are there secrets in a
And it's just enough secret for like average person who doesn't do this stuff to like have that little bit of time and read about it and think that's so cool. Like it gives them enough like media clout.
I just wanted to see one more piece of like all those things are very throwaway that you end up getting to.
Oh yeah,
and I wanted to see one more little insight
like
on
plot
those pages.
Thing, maybe.
Yeah,
and so I haven't kept up with Black Mirror. I've seen I think the first and the second season, and I think they're extraordinary. It's just one of those things where I've been like, I will watch these one day. There's no pressing reason to see
1 and 2 is worth it.
You need some emotional headspace.
Exactly.
So I don't blame
you.
you.
Mood.
I mean, there are a couple of episodes that I've seen where I was like, that is on par with some of the best things I've seen in a while. But there was one episode which my wife was watching, and I was kind of like side watching with her. And she was watching an episode where
side watching sounds like a name of a Black Mirror episode.
Probably, yeah. Where it's a sort of dystopian future where people are watching a character be tortured because she has committed some crime.
That is White Bear.
Oh, is that White Bear?
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, and I was like, it would be cool if this was kind of like the prototype for White Bear or something like that.
It was, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't. James, were you looking at an article that said something about that? That I believe we looked at all this trivia before coming. I could be mistaken about this, but I believe the initial conception for, I think it was White Bear, was for it to. Oh no, it was playtest.
Right.
Oh yeah.
The
Playtest was going to have
before Bandersnatch was Bandersnatch. They were toying with adding some interactivity to a pre-existing episode.
Yeah.
Right.
And they decided not to go with it at that time, but I guess now they decided the time is right.
The time is not.
And it's also interesting the way this came about, which is that Netflix prompted Charlie Brooker to do this. It wasn't a case of Charlie Brooker having a story that kind of fit. It was like, we have this opportunity to do this technology. Do you have a story that you think would work? And he came up with something. And I think, I think for that, it's actually really extraordinary what he's done here and what the show has done and what they've managed to pull off. It's just, it's not as profound as some of the other ones where I kind of feel like he's had some burning commentary about technology that he's wanted to say, and in a language that he completely fully understands, as opposed to this one where it's like, hey, we've got this language, what's a story that fits into it?
Here's how, and I'll sort of get into sort of my final thoughts here a little bit on it too, is I don't think this is a profound experience. I think it is interesting and I think it is fun. I didn't walk away from it being like, oh my God, reality is different than when I first came in. It's like, no, it just played with concepts of possible ways reality works. And I was like, oh, I'm familiar with this. This is nice.
Well, that's because you didn't drop acid before.
That is true.
Yeah. You wouldn't have had a choice though, apparently, because if you choose not to drop acid, you're still going to get acid.
Yeah, I know, which was shady. But I did thoroughly enjoy the experience much more than I thought I did. My expectations, I don't know why my expectations were so low. I think the pedigree of Black Mirror is a good one. It's a show that I actually trust. I think maybe it's because I've been conditioned to do this via corporations and how they do it. Like the fact that it was a Netflix ask. It wasn't a thing that they were like, I need to make this. It was like it's a well-made thing someone was commissioned to do. And I don't know. I don't want to paint. I feel like I want to be very careful. I don't want to paint it like it's so fantastic and everyone's going to love it, because I don't think everyone's going to love it. I think some people will love it, some people will be like, this is stupid, but I think it's something interesting that if you have a Netflix account, I think it is worth at least trying and seeing if, get an ending or two and see if you want to keep going further. Yeah, Zozo? You watched it. Sorry. She's been mouthy today, everybody. Listeners, I'm terribly sorry. My cat is being weird.
Well, I'm curious what your both of your final thoughts are on this, just because it is so, and I'm really grateful that you guys were actually here and this was the thing we could talk about, because it's so up your alley in terms of like what it is you guys talk about and what it is you do. I mean, where do you think that this is a future step that will kind of progress and it can get better, or do you think that this is kind of an example of why we shouldn't be doing this? Or
my thought is that I think that this was fundamentally a success, and
right.
it's better than I thought it would be, and I do think that this is going to be the beginning of more of these. And I have a feeling we're going to backtrack. I think we're going to get a whole bunch now that are going to be a lot worse as the medium sort of finds its feet. But I think that this is absolutely sort of the beginning of a new era for media.
And for me, I mean, I agree. All of my complaints have been because I feel like this was so close to brilliant, but not quite there. I completely agree with what Jack said about we're going to get a lot of not great ones of these.
Get ready for the schlock.
Maybe watch the Puss in Boots already. We've already got that.
But I do think that there are stories that can't be told through traditional cinema, that also can't be told through traditional games, which can be told through this sort of thing. And eventually we will hit one of those, right? Like this was really close to dealing with ideas and issues that are better dealt with through this format. And so, hopefully people keep experimenting with this, but do it well.
Yeah. Oddly, I think you're right, which is that it's the complaints that I have are to do with it getting so close to being brilliant, and because of what you said as well, which is that the actual narrative is tied into the interactivity and into the medium, and I think those are really that is the right way to do this, and that is a sort of a good case study for like why to do this. I'm getting the impression the other full motion video that you guys reviewed earlier, Late Shift wasn't as
it was
good.
Bad. It was silly. A lot of the fun of it was because it was bad, and we could just sort of ride it out together and see what happened.
If we played that individually, we would have been bored out of our minds.
Yeah.
I think if you're out there and want to check out a full motion video game, the best probably out there is called Her Story, and so that's the one I would recommend. But things like Late Shift, God, there's been so many. Not full motion video is kind of a joke in our industry. I still want to see somebody do it well. I'm actually very curious to see the first one done well, but a lot of them are
and in that respect, something like the Telltale games are better examples of the impact that branching storylines can have, because those are kind of less gamey games and more story driven, like that use the game format to achieve what they need to achieve, right? Like the technology is better suited to something like The Walking Dead on Telltale games than it is to then doing an interactive episode of The Walking Dead on Netflix, right?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, I think I agree, which is that I think things don't work here, but I'm excited by the potential for this to work eventually, and I think this was a really important first. Well, and again, it's not the first step, but a really important step in terms of like mainstreaming this idea and also fundamentally changing the way we think about cinema. Because the thing that I was sort of really curious about as a filmmaker was like, how does the language of what I understand of how cinema works, how do I have to think about that differently if I was to make something where choices were important to an audience? And new possibilities in cinema technology always do that. And I think this was a really good example of someone thinking about those problems and those issues kind of in a really clear and succinct way. Now, the storyline didn't quite get there, and I think, but the thing that would have made this work is so profoundly difficult to achieve in an ordinary film that it's like it's sort of weird to sort of nitpick it for that. We review 52 films a year, and maybe 20 of them are profoundly impacted.
Right.
You know what I mean? So to ask a film that is working in a new space with a new technology to do all that technology well and then be emotionally impactful is a big ask, and it's very close. So I think that's a sort of an interesting, exciting experiment that I hope we'll see more of. But I also agree fundamentally with what you say was we're going to see a lot of terrible ones. I think, and based off the amount of discussion this film will probably generate.
Well, this has been the only podcast about Black Mirror's Bandersnatch. Or has it? Because we don't know how many paths
we should
has
record
gone.
different endings. We were like, we liked it, we didn't like it.
Oh my God! You know what?
We should let viewers choose. They can vote.
Yeah.
Today, they can go out and in the comment section, right? Leave a comment, vote, decide whether or not we liked Bandersnatch.
And maybe we already did.
Oh,
and maybe Matt killed his dad,
or is already dead,
or maybe Zoe is my dad.
All right, on that note.
I think that's it.
Well, Jac, James, thank you so much for coming on when you are not making fantabulous things alongside me with extra credits. Where can folks find you?
Oh, that's
if you want to be found.
No, I'm going to direct them towards extra credits because that way they can see the product of both of our work.
Yes. All right, excellent.
I just sort of live in a barrel on a mountain deep in a cave deep in the woods.
I'm imagining that scene in The Hobbit where the barrel...
like that, yeah.
That sounds exciting.
You mean the one enjoyable scene in The Hobbit? Sorry,
exactly.
Hobbit shade. All right, excellent. Barrel talk. Shahir, when you are not being forced by fate or possibly not to watch interactive non-film films, where can folks find you?
Ooh, that was so convoluted, but you can... Yeah. I should build some interactivity into my website, but as it stands, it's just a business card, basically, but it's Shahir Daud, that's SHAHIRDAUD.com. Matt, when you are not killing your cat dad, where can people find you?
That's so sad. She just, you can find me at my website, MATTHEWKROL.com for my life and works, or Skeletor, 4, PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. One day I'll solidify all that. Also, as James had mentioned, check out Extra Credits. We are back from our break this week. I believe we're going to be starting on Wednesday. We have an episode about sound design and specifically some stuff in Overwatch, and also we'll be continuing Sun Yat-sen's saga, which was trending on the YouTube machine over the holidays, which was part two.
Only episode 2. Yeah.
So strange.
Oh, really?
But it's great.
What happens in part 2 that didn't happen?
Oh, well, you have to watch it, Shahir.
Oh, man, I should...
It's exciting.
It's a very good series. Shout out to Robert Rath, the writer of that wonderful thing. But yeah, until next time.